If you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it enough. So let's make it simple. Starting a video with an Einstein quote is probably the most pretentious thing I've ever done. Today. After looking around at other artists and other videos, it seems like I approach non-metallic metal in a different way. That could be a good or a bad thing. I get a lot of my inspiration from comic books, cartoons, and movie posters, which means I mostly aim for clear detail separation, vibrant colors, and the most stripped-back way possible to create a metallic effect. So in this video, we're not going to do any blending at all. All we're going to do is try and trick our eye enough that our brain thinks that something is metallic or reflective. Stupid brain. TLDR, all we're going to do is layer one color on top of another, just like shingles on a roof. And all that means is every time we layer up, we're going to show a little bit of the previous layer showing underneath it. And just like the diagram, it means we're going to kick off with Deep Ocean Blue. I'm going to warn you right now, this is not pretty. This is a bare bone basics or a killer way to get non-metallic metal to look good on the tabletop. And because in this video we're going to cover the fundamentals of light placement and contrast, we're not doing any blending at all. But before we start talking like a starving artist who's just so deep and brilliant and nobody understands because we are so deep and brilliant, let's talk about what we're actually doing. The Deep Ocean Blue step is going to be the longest step in the entire model. Think about this as a typical base coat. The only thing that's a little bit different that you may have noticed is we're leaving a lot of that black to show through. And that's because we're only going to paint the top 2/3 of each shape. And this is where we start talking about light placement. For this model, I'm imagining that the light source is above and slightly towards the front. So the part that we're painting now are the areas that the light would be able to directly shine onto. Think about it as if you were standing on a dark stage and the spotlight is shining directly down on you. Or if you're a fan of Queen, just like the film clip for Bohemian Rhapsody where they're all just floating singing heads. Now that we have the base coat down, we're going to start highlighting with that Imperial Navy. And even though this is only the second color on the model, this is where the party gets started. Because the base coat was basically just a sketch of where the light was going to hit, we now know the areas that we need to focus on. And this is where the idea of volumetric highlighting comes back. In comic books and cartoons, everything's flat, it's all 2D. And here's where we start taking our cues from illustrators and animators. Instead of gradients, the idea is to use blocks of colors sitting on top of each other in layers to give a shape a form. Or a form a shape, it's the same thing. The only difference here in working with a 3D object is we didn't have to draw the form. All we're going to do is exaggerate the depth by using darker colors in the recesses where all the shadows should be, and exaggerate the shape by using lighter colors to highlight. And this is where all the black magic starts. We're going to pull back the curtain to reveal another curtain, because now we have to discuss contrast. In this example, the contrast is literally just between light and dark. We've got a dark blue sitting in our shadows, we've got a mid-tone as a blue as well, and we're going to move into a really light blue for our highlights. And no, it doesn't have to be blue, you can use any colors. When you combine the idea of contrast, volumetric highlighting, and a single source of light, this is where things start to take a turn towards the metallic. The quick wide jump of contrast gives us a perception of depth. The volumetric highlighting gives us an idea of the shapes, and the simple idea of light coming from one direction, not the band, dictating where we should put our highlights to be reflections, all work together to create a perfect storm to alter our perception of the material. Now, here is the really cool part. You already paint like this. The stock standard idea of base coat, wash, layer, and highlight is very, very similar. The only thing that's missing is the idea of a light source from one direction. Again, not the band. Instead of edge highlighting around an entire panel or shape, try just edge highlighting the very tops of each shape. That small difference will give you the feeling of directional light. And if you're already comfortable enough with that idea, try making those highlights a little bit wider. And when you do that, that's exactly what this is. I've been using a very similar set of colors and hue jump that an heavy metal painter would use. But instead of using it to outline every single panel, we've used them to exaggerate shapes instead of details. Now, I know this looks uglier than the underside of a ball sack, but even with how rough these layers are, you already get the impression of reflection. And now that we're adding in little dots of marine mist on the hardest and sharpest points, it's really going to start to sell the idea that it's metallic. And if a paint job this rough can give that kind of impression, it must mean that blending doesn't matter. Because it absolutely doesn't. Yes, if I did spend all the time blending the transitions between each layer together, it would give a higher quality feel. Because it would be a higher quality paint job. But that is a ridiculous amount of hours worth of work. But if I had to paint 60 of that, it would absolutely not happen. Don't get me wrong, 60 of these isn't going to happen either, but it'd be a lot more doable. And as you progress as a painter, you can always come back to these same models and glaze down those transitions. And if you want to look at it that way, as you get better, your army gets better. Yeah, cool, let's do this ad and get it over with. Alright, so I hate doing ads, you know that, but this is my full-time gig and this is how I don't starve. Seriously, if I get any skinnier, I'm going to disappear when I turn sideways. So instead of trying to sell you something that I really don't give three shits about, I'm just going to tell you about the Patreon. We've just busted open a brand new tier where every month we're going to get together as a group and we're going to go through some fundamental painting courses. We're going to grab a couple of models, pick some techniques, and basically sit down and go through all of it. So all of those extra little details that you wanted to know, you can get the answers to all the questions that you've ever thought of while watching a video, and the best part is the real-time feedback. But if group sessions aren't for you, there's a few spots left in the one-on-one paint lessons. That way, it's just you and me, in a slightly less creepy way. So if you want to spend some time with your favorite heretic and push some pigments, I'll have the links in the description. Also, if you go to the Army Painter in-games, use the code HERESY5, 5% off. Done. Now we're going to use the same idea from the beginning of the video to make this a little bit more interesting. Also, as if I could get through an entire video without using pink. Now, we know from everyday life that real metal has a lot more than just a single point of light or reflection. Light bounces off just about everything, and if your material is reflective, it's going to show that. Now, to represent that, we're going to use the exact same layering idea, but from underneath. And as your starving artist representative, this fancy term is called bounce lighting. In this example, we're going to make it feel like there's light bouncing off of a different surface that's underneath, so most likely the ground, and it's being reflected in the underside of all the metal. But it's also a really good way to start thinking about OSL. But because we want to keep this simple and not introduce a second direction of light, we're just going to use the whole bounce light thing. Now, reflective materials don't actually have a shadow, because they're reflective, they're reflecting things. But the way that we're going to think about the placement for this is like a shadow. For all of our blues, we've imagined a light source coming from above and slightly to the front, like our stage light. And typically, on any other surface where the light can't reach, that would be a shadow. And using that same line of thinking, that's where we're going to start to push in the colors to represent our bounce lights. And again, this could be any color that you wanted. One of the main things that you do have to keep in mind though with bounce lights is they are not as intense as a direct light. And the way that we're going to represent that is by not painting the highlights as bright. The brightest highlights on the blue was Marine Mist, which is kind of like an off turquoise white. So we need to find a color that isn't quite as bright as that one, but with a little bit more pinkish hue. This way we're still getting in all of our highlights, but it's not going to look as intense as a direct light source does. But we're going to be treating it in the exact same way, picking out all of those sticky outy and sharp edges. Pink Potion was the pick for this one. It shouldn't be a surprise at all that this would be my color palette. But what I really like with applying these techniques to this color palette in this way is it starts to give a real cool synthwave chrome kind of feel. Those little specular highlights, even though they're tiny minuscule dots just on the corners and sticky outy bits, they really make it. I know what you're thinking, god damn that is rough up close. And it absolutely is. But the whole idea was to give a foundational understanding of how non-metallic metal works. And from 5 feet away on the tabletop, it actually looks pretty solid. Drop a comment below and let me know, did this help you out and are you going to try it out? As always, a massive thank you to InGames, the Army Painter, and the best Patreon members in the world. Big love, you filthy heretics.